In the Word of Yahuwah study, we saw that God is two, and as such, he created two in his image to represent him. Likewise, in God's covenant with Israel, there are two people in the nation who are anointed with the holy oil, the king and the priest. We see this pattern with Yahuwah and Yeshua, Moses and Aaron, and Joshua and Eleazar, on down to David and Zadok, Zerubbabel and Joshua, among others. So let's examine that pattern to reveal God's very first priest here on earth, beginning with the roles. The role of judge, which eventually becomes the role of king, is to judge hard matters along with the priest and to teach judgment. In order to fulfill this, they are required to know and to keep the law. In the Genesis account, we are told Adam was created to work the land. He was also given dominion over all the animals that were on the earth, which he gave names to. Thus, the king tends to external and secular affairs and defends against external threats. Adam's role is well recognized, so nothing new here. So let's move on to the role of the priest. The duties of the priest include tending to the menorah and burning incense every morning and evening, making sure there is always shewbread on the table, and offering the sacrifices after making sure they were up to standard. So looking at this simplistically, the priest works in God's house and is in charge of making sure it is in order. He makes sure the lights stay on and that it smells good, and he also checks and cooks the food. Sometimes he burns it, but others he takes his portion and then gives you your plate. Now, obedience is better than sacrifice. So let's move on to the foremost role of the priest. Malachi 2:7 says that the priest's lips should keep knowledge, and they should seek the law at his mouth, for he is the messenger of Yahuwah Sabaoth. So the priest is the spiritual leader of Yah's house, second in command only to Yah himself. If you have questions about God's law, the priest should have answers. If he doesn't have answers, he should petition God by lot. He also bears the iniquity of his priesthood. Therefore, he is responsible for the wrongdoing of those who he ill instructs. Thus, the priest tends to internal and spiritual affairs and defends against internal threats. So next, let's look at the establishment of the priesthood. In exchange for passing over Israel during the Exodus, God claims all that open the matrix of every woman of Israel. He then establishes the priesthood by substituting a Levite for each firstborn male, and redeeming the remaining males with a payment of 5 shekels. But what if the firstborn is female? Let's look at the sin offering. The sin offering for the priest or the whole congregation is a bull, representing the high priest. For a leader, it is a goat, representing that leader. This would include kings also. For the commoner, though, it is a female goat or a female lamb. Now let's carry this back to the garden. We are told that Eve was created to be a suitable helper for Adam. Help him do what? Work in the garden? I don't think so. The word suitable means to stand in front of or opposite to. So Eve was created to oppose Adam. But I thought they were supposed to be a team. After all, they are one. When is she supposed to oppose him? Well, God created Eve after he determined that it was not good for man to be alone, which just so happens to be right after he told him not to eat from the forbidden tree. Therefore, Eve was created to oppose Adam when he attempted to make his way to said tree, making her the guardian of God's commandment and God's very first earthly high priest. We are never told how Eve knew the law. It is assumed Adam told her, but that is not written. There is certainly a precedent for it, with God giving the law to Israel, who are also supposed to be a kingdom of priests, being his bride, and Yeshua clarifying the law to his 12 apostles, who are his bride. We also see Moses giving the law to Aaron, and in that dynamic, Moses represents God and later becomes judge, and Aaron is his prophet and later priest. So this could be taken to mean that God gave the law to both Adam and Eve directly. Who knows? But I think it is worth mentioning the lack of information here. We saw in the Yom Kippur study that the serpent of Revelation represents the wicked high priest and the power behind them. And that representation goes all the way back to the garden, where that serpent first revealed itself through Eve's disobedience to God's law. So Eve was the first high priest, the ace in the hole that turned out not to be an ace after all. And when God comes to Adam and asks him who told him he was naked, what does he do? He blames Eve. She has to bear the iniquity of her priesthood. Now that we know this, the logical conclusion for why there is no substitution for the firstborn female and why the sin offering of commoners is female is because the sin of commoners is being attributed to a female. Therefore, the priestly responsibility for each individual household lies with a female. So who is that female? Well, Eve was Adam's wife, so that's number one. And after they sinned, Adam named Eve Kawa, meaning life, because she was the mother of all the living. So wife for the married, mother for the unmarried. So when Solomon said, he who finds a wife finds good and obtains favor or acceptance of Yahuwah, he was talking about the woman who opens her mouth in wisdom and on whose tongue is the law of favor or goodness. But if the wife, whose primary responsibility is tending to her house, including teaching her children God's law, and even offering wisdom to her husband, and spiritually interceding on his behalf when necessary, is defiled or otherwise not on her game, what happens? The entire house and eventually the land becomes defiled, as is the case with the high priest of God's house also. So from my vantage point, the structure of Israel as a kingdom of priests is this. The Aaronites and Levites are responsible for the upkeep of God's house and corporally teaching his law to his children. The men work outside the house, giving them opportunity to evangelize strangers and bring them to their well-lit home where their wives can set bread before them, with the purpose of the strangers being impressed with the order of the house and wanting it for themselves. From there, the wife can teach the foreign woman how to make the bread and press the oil, that there may be light in all Israel and eventually the whole world. So all Israel has a part to play in expanding God's kingdom. In contrast to Adam's well-recognized role, the woman's role is not so readily detected. And this lack of knowledge is further aggravated by false doctrine concerning women. But what did Yeshua say to Martha when she complained about Mary sitting at his feet instead of fulfilling the traditionally recognized role of helping around the house? He said that Mary had chosen that good part which is required, which shall not be taken away from her. So the role remains, albeit with much difficulty. But obedience is indeed better than sacrifice, and to listen and hear than the fat of rams.